I remember around 2010 when we first had the Green Economy Summit, and we sat with the economic cluster colleagues. I mean, they are economists and we just environmental science people, and they taught us what language to use and how to say this so that it can be accepted. So there is evidence that countrywide the sustainability transition has been adopted into the government policy, but specifically also the DSI. If you look at the 2002 R&D strategy and you compare it with the 2019 decadal plan and the white paper, they are specifically adopting sustainability transitions. And I think for this committee, it's important that we then pay attention to what this transition really means. And I think, so last week I was attending an engagement of SAIA, South African International Institute of, SAIA. And that event, it actually reminded me, why are we doing this transition? And they were launching a socio-ecological report, environmental sustainability report. And what was important about that is to say, there's a socio-ecological element why we are in this. So there's a part where we need to say, yes, we are transitioning, but we need to do two things. There's a part where, yes, we are preventing further damage, but there's a part where we need to do restoration of what we've damaged already. Of course, there's controversy about who damaged this and who should pay and all that, but the reality is there are two things that we're dealing with: preventing further damage, but also restoring what has been damaged already. And if you look at the Climate Change Act, for example, Chapter 3, and there's talks here about municipalities also. Chapter 3 now gives municipalities a mandate, because in the past they were saying climate change is not their mandate. It's giving them a mandate to do proper climate planning and mainstream that into their planning. And what is key about that, and then only earlier in the transport plan, we've seen they talk about spatial transformation issues. It's one of the goals that struck me is that one. And why I want to mention that is because when you look at Chapter 4 of the Climate Change Act, it talks about climate change adaptation. And I think we're not paying attention to the risks and vulnerabilities of the very same infrastructure that we are planning for now. I'm informed that Toyota is suing KZN for the floods that happened in their facility. So infrastructure risk and vulnerability is important. So we are working now with our colleagues in the district municipalities, where they are now doing risk and vulnerabilities and response implementation plan. It was interesting. We even have arguments. We show the science. So there's projections that we look at in terms of what are the hazards that you're gonna face now in 20 years and up to 2050. So we had arguments. One of the projections was saying 45 degrees in 20 whatever. And people were arguing that, no, actually it's 35. And then, but others were like, no, 45 is not possible. And then one person in the room said, well, do you know that yesterday it was already 43 degrees? We were in Khatsibande in Mpumalanga. So some of the future projections are already happening as we speak now. But what is also interesting is some of the places that are dry now may have floods in future, or some that have got floods now, they might be drier in future. So as you plan for the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure, you need to pay attention to that, and that's what Chapter 4 is talking about, the risks and vulnerabilities that we are going to face, but that means in two aspects, in terms of ecological infrastructure, but then also in terms of the hard infrastructure, which I think the transport sector is focusing on. Then the Chapter 5, I think mostly here, people are mitigation people, I would assume, because you're talking about emissions. You're not talking largely about ecological issues. But yeah, Chapter 5, as this plan, the Just Transition Plan that was presented here, I'm understanding it that it will be part of what Chapter 5 requires, sectoral emission targets from each sector. So each of these sectors are required to tell us as environmental affairs, how are they planning to reduce emissions from their sector, and that's what you've seen them presenting here. And that's why I say my job is easy, is just to look at what sectors are committing to do, but tweak things here and there as they go about it. And that's what Chapter 5 is about. What we are also seeing in Chapter 5, somebody spoke about the CBAM, is we've got the carbon budgets, which is what then the industries are paying, but in terms of the carbon tax. What is key is that the attention to the off-road emissions, the vehicles that are within facilities, and DST spoke about what they are doing to assist industry in terms of reducing emissions, like whether it's in your landfill site or in any facilities that those heavy equipment that they are using, how to shift emissions from those, because when we calculate their carbon budget and their mitigation plans, we do consider those off-road emissions. We've got a gap, of course, with how to deal with on-road emissions. We've got your Coca-Cola or whoever delivering logistics generally, these heavy vehicles that you see. At the moment, we don't fully account for those emissions when we do their carbon budget. But so having said that, in short, then the Climate Change Act, please pay attention to the adaptation issues. Yes, there's still a lot to be done on the mitigation, which is Chapter 5. Now, the NDC that was approved by Cabinet last week, there's a goal, NDC Goal 3. It talks about upgrading critical transport infrastructure, and it looks at the roads and the rail and the port. But what is key about the interventions that are picked up there is also linked again to the risks and vulnerabilities and the need to upgrade those infrastructure. As well as, interestingly, I'm not sure, you guys might be aware, which infrastructures are at the high-risk zones that will need to be relocated in that regard. So those are some of the interventions where the sector is saying, this infrastructure is in a high-risk zone, we need to relocate. That means cost. So that means whatever initiative you are planning now from a transport point of view, you need to be aware of high-risk zones that may change in terms of what you are doing. And then, of course, how then will we track then there's many other ways that the NDC will be tracked, and we will be looking into those aspects.